The topic of today, I think, would be inappropriate for a man to open up and speak about. I think a woman's perspective is really important on this topic today. So without further ado, if we can all give our undivided attention, I would like to invite Miss Meredith up. And y'all give her a round of applause. Oh, we can do better than that, yeah. She's got some words for you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me get my notes out here. So first, I would just like to say thank you to Christopher for inviting me to share. When he approached me and asked me, I'd really like a woman to share what she feels about what's been happening. So I felt a little bit surprised because all of my life I've been a part of a lot of churches where women are not invited to stand in this space, where this is not somewhere that I'm allowed to be holding dominion over men or something to that effect. So I feel very honored to be invited to share my voice and to, on behalf of women, share a little bit of what we've been feeling, what we've been thinking over the past few weeks with what's been going on in our country. So thank you so much, Christopher. So happy to be a part of a space and a church that invites that. So, Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court was emotional for women across the country. I think that it's a much bigger issue than this one isolated thing. I think that, a year ago, the Me Too movement went viral, and women decided to stand up and start sharing, hey, these are the things that have happened to me, and these are the things that have happened to me, these are the things that I experience, daily, weekly, all of the time, and it's unacceptable, and we can't allow this to happen. And so with that happening over the course of a year and people coming out and telling their stories, not just women, but people and different celebrities drawing attention to this issue, to have Brett Kavanaugh, after everything that he was accused of, nominated to one of the highest positions of power in our country, just really feels like a devastating blow. So it's been just a very traumatic time, very triggering for a lot of people. And again, I really appreciate the invitation to talk a little bit about what that's been like and what, as women, we feel. So, if you're not a woman, here's a little bit of a snapshot of what it's like to be born a woman and to eventually, grow into a female body that you're very quickly taught to protect. So you're not really allowed to just walk around the world in the same way as a man, but from a young age you're taught different things that are rules that you need to follow. So I'd say for me it started at about 12, that there are certain kinds of clothing that you're not allowed to wear. And it's a little confusing as basically a child because you don't understand why. And they're not going to explain to you why because it can be a little bit scary. But I remember from a young age, certain skirts are inappropriate or your bra strap is not allowed to be shown. And even being pulled out of classes at school for reasons like that. And I think that that's just such a ridiculous and offensive and ineffective strategy to avoid, I don't know what the goal is, to avoid being sexually assaulted, but it's just ridiculous. Another thing you're not allowed to do is go places by yourself, especially at night. You can't go for a run in an isolated place. And I just don't think that this is not the way that we protect women. When I was about 13, I am the youngest of 4 sisters. And when I turned about 13, my older sisters sat me down and they explained to me what they called the golden party rules, which because they figured I'd probably start going to parties soon and they wanted me to be able to protect myself. So there was a couple of things that they taught me, which I didn't understand at the time, that I was being taught to protect myself from men when I could potentially put myself in a vulnerable position. So a few of those rules were, 1, you have to go everywhere with a buddy. You have to have a girlfriend with you at this party because it's not safe to be by yourself. And 2, if you have a drink, if you set it down on a table or leave it unattended for any period of time, it's done and you can't touch that drink anymore. And these are just a few things that as women, we walk through the world every day with these in our heads. Okay, what am I wearing? What's my facial expression? What am I putting into my body? Because it seems that we're held responsible for the actions of men and of other people. So, again, I just think that this is ridiculous and an ineffective strategy for protecting women. If you have women that you care about, then we just need to change how we think about women and how we protect women in this world. Another thing I'd like to talk about is just a few of the horrific things that have happened over the past few years to women. So one, there's a online community called the incel community, which if you have not heard of, is men who are involuntarily celibate and are angry with women to the point that they want to kill them because they feel that women owe them a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship. And this culminated in Elliot Rodger, who in Santa Barbara, if you remember, committed mass murder because he was so angry with women and with the men that he felt envious of. And I think it's just a symptom of something that's happening in our society and something that people feel. And it might not seem real, but there's a very large community of men that feel this way. Another one is John Enochs, who got off with 1 year of probation after sexually assaulting 2 women. 1 year of probation. Unacceptable. Brock Turner served only 3 months in jail out of a 6-month sentence after sexually assaulting a woman. Donald Trump is the president. He's been accused of sexual assault multiple times, talks about women in a disrespectful and degrading manner regularly, and yet is allowed to be the president of our country. Following all of that, Brett Kavanaugh has now been sworn in as a Supreme Court justice. So as a woman, that's a little bit of the journey that we've been feeling, of trying to have our voices heard, trying to make a difference, and wanting to not have these types of people in positions of power. So it's just been devastating, I would say. Another thing I've heard from some women are that people like Donald Trump and Brett Kavanaugh represent someone who has abused them in the past. They look at Donald Trump, they look at Brett Kavanaugh, and they see, that's my abusive father. That's someone who has sexually assaulted me in the past. And they're holding this position of power over people in our country. So it's not really just this individual person or one isolated incident, but it's a symptom of a sickness within our country and the world, not just our country. Another question that has been coming up a lot is, why don't women come forward? Why do they wait so long to come forward when their story could have been more credible early on? Which is, first of all, ridiculous. After what someone has experienced, to expect them to be able to stand up and coherently explain and recount an experience that they've had is not something that you can ask. But further than that, I'm a statistics person. I like numbers and I like data. So here are some very disturbing statistics. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 1 in 6. Think about how many women you know, and you can do the math. Out of 1,000 rapes, 994 perpetrators will walk free. Only 310 will be reported to the police. Of those 310 that are reported, only 57 will lead to an arrest. Only 11 of those will get referred to prosecutors, only 7 will lead to a felony conviction, and only 6 out of 1,000 rapists will be incarcerated. So if you're wondering why women don't come forward, here's a good reason. This is an issue that needs to be taken seriously, regardless of whether you think that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty or innocent. He's a symbol of something else. Sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape is something that's happening every single day in our country and across the world, and it's something that needs to change. So thank you again, Christopher, for allowing me to speak. I'd like to invite him back up. Thank you.
I want Meredith to open up to speak to us today from a woman's perspective about the events that have been unfolding in our society as of late. Because this is not something that we men can fully comprehend. She did a wonderful job at speaking to something from the heart that frankly would have been inappropriate for me or any man to come up here and comment on at first. But who I can speak to appropriately is them boys. So men, you may not like what I have to say today. I'm used to it. It's okay. But I got the microphone so you can listen to every word I've got to say. So several evangelical men that I've been conversing with online certainly didn't like what I had to say to them. And the phrase, "What would Jesus do?" is a question that I get asked often by these straight, white, Christian, supposedly, men. And it's the same question that I've been asked recently by a conservative pastor online that did not appreciate our subversive methodology of demanding justice from power and speaking truth to stupid. But to answer that question, boys, I gotta tell you that Jesus would not coddle those that endorse sexism. Jesus would break up our little boys club in America. That's what Jesus would do. And to see this, we're going to look at a passage in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 3 through 11. And I'll read that out loud. You can follow along if you'd like. It says this, "And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law that Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?' They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, 'Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her.' And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with this woman standing before him. And Jesus straightened up, and he said to her, 'Woman, where are they?' Some translations say, 'Where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, sir.' And Jesus said, 'Neither do I condemn you.'" This woman is dragged before Jesus, and these men start quoting the Old Testament to defend their corrupt system of governance. Yes, the Old Testament did, in fact, in the book of Deuteronomy, demand stoning. But remember that these are stories, accounts, and directives in the scriptures that were written by flawed ancient people that believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Okay, these people did not have it all together, but God met them in their flaws. And this is why believing that everything directed in the Bible is somehow supposed to be God's law in a modern time is a ridiculous notion. Hypothetically, if God is constructed of love itself, like the scripture says over and over and over again from beginning to end of the Bible, then hypothetically, God would not demand such horrific acts, which is why Jesus often refutes these passages that are in the scriptures and directs people to simply love one another. And if we truly love each other, the scripture says all the laws hang upon this, meaning everything will fall into place. But I digress. They brought this woman forth and they put her in front of Jesus to have her punished. And notice in this passage that the man that she had an affair with was nowhere to be found. Now, we should have lots of questions about that when we read this passage. Where is the man? Why isn't he mentioned? Why isn't he being punished with death like it directs men and women to both be stoned to death in the book of Deuteronomy? Was there even another man to begin with? Or maybe they just didn't like this woman. Was she assaulted or raped by a married man? And was she being punished because no one believed her story when she told others that she was raped? Did they believe the man over her? We don't know any of this. Maybe some of that happened, maybe not. We don't know because that ancient society did not hold men accountable for such things. Kind of like American society don't hold men accountable for shit today. Ancient Judaism had terrible laws, like requiring women to marry their rapist, according to the book of Deuteronomy. This ancient society
considered women to be property, y'all. This was a society that didn't give women a voice anywhere, kind of like America doesn't give women a voice now. And this woman, like many women today in America, is taken to be judged by the boys' club and is brought before Jesus, a notable rabbi. Now understand that a rabbi was one of the most privileged people in ancient Jewish society because of his title, his education, and his gender. But this wasn't just any rabbi. Jesus was already a holy troublemaker in a troubled society. Jesus was an ally to the oppressed, and that was a major pain in the ass to both the religious and political patriarchies of his day. Which is why this trap in this verse that you may not even have known was there is so diabolically perfect. This wasn't just an attempt by sexist religious leaders to judge a woman unjustly. This was also their attempt to silence one of the most powerful allies for justice in that region at that time. You see, the law of Moses that the religious leaders referenced is in the book of Leviticus 20:10, and it says this: if a man, notice how it includes men, commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, not just any woman, but the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. But in that society, if you committed adultery and you committed adultery with someone who was not married, then the woman was only punished and not the man. So men were only punished, according to Leviticus, if the woman was another man's wife, because in that society, a woman's sexuality was owned by her husband, but clearly not vice versa. There was no death penalty if a man had an affair with an unmarried woman. Again, this is why the trap is so clever. If Jesus had said that Mary Magdalene should be put to death, then what would have happened would have been that the religious leaders could report to Roman officials that Jesus was trying to deal out a death penalty, and Rome could have had him silenced via crucifixion. Okay? Roman law did not punish adulterers at that time with death, nor were Jewish folks allowed to punish anyone in their community for adultery with the penalty of death, because Rome gave them permission for who they could and couldn't kill based on their crimes. So that option was no good for Jesus. And if Jesus would have said that Mary Magdalene should not die, then the Jewish leaders could have had him stoned to death for being a blasphemer and refuting their ancient scriptures. And blasphemy was a permissible execution that was given to Jewish folks under Roman occupation. So they were fine with Jewish folks stoning blasphemers, they just weren't allowed to stone adulterers. So not only was this poor woman being judged unjustly, but an ally and a feminist was potentially going to be executed for causing trouble to the patriarchy if that ally defended her. So here's Jesus, the ultimate example of a righteous advocate for justice, an ally to the oppressed, a known holy troublemaker, staring death in the face, and what he does next is so powerful. He takes the focus of judgment off of the victim and turns his attention to the victimizer. Just like we should have done with Dr. Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. Jesus doesn't judge Mary, he judges him, and he judges him. And he doesn't stop there, he judges him, and him, and him, and him. He bends down and he starts writing their names in the sand. And many theologians believe that not only was he writing their names, but the Greek insists that he was listing every crime that those men had ever done in secret. And considering these religious leaders were in bed with empire, there were likely quite a few Levitical laws that they were breaking too, that they hadn't been caught for, that would have required their death. Now don't hear what I'm not saying. Very important. Jesus isn't advocating for a death penalty, but he is absolutely slaying the out of patriarchy, y'all. So back to my opening question. What would Jesus have done if Jesus was here today with Brett Kavanaugh? He would have asked Brett, why did you demand Dr. Ford take a polygraph, yet when hers came back supporting her account 100% and her innocence, you, Brett, then declined to take one yourself? Brett, why were you calling Dr. Ford a liar after you texted your friends to be quiet and not to talk to the FBI? Brett, why does the testimony of your current friends need to be heard, but your college roommate's testimony that saw you blacked out multiple times a week your entire college career not need to be trusted? Donald Trump, he wouldn't just stop with Brett. He would point out him and him and him. Donald Trump, why do you call Dr. Ford a liar and mock her in front of thousands of people, but you want to limit the scope of the FBI's investigation? Donald Trump, why are you calling Dr. Ford a liar and mocking her, but you still haven't released your tax returns? And perhaps to the 80% of the evangelical male populace that celebrated Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation, Jesus might ask something like this: how the hell are you going to believe a 2,000-year-old account that says my mother was a virgin when she got pregnant, but you deny indisputable evidence that Brett was a rapist and that the GOP and our nation's current administration are doing their damnedest to cover it up? So what would Jesus do? My conclusion is this. Jesus, and I could say this because it's a PG-13 room, Jesus wasn't a boy. He would have called straight to the face of unjust, corrupt male leadership. So Christian men, if you are a man that claims to be chivalrous and stand up for women in this country, but you are silent about misogyny at your office, at your dinner table, in your car, at your family reunions, in the locker room, or at the bar, not only are you a hypocrite, but you are part of the problem with religion in this church and in this country, pun intended. If I could drop this mic right now, I would.